go, Johnny. Play. All right. Welcome, everybody. We're live. We're broadcasting. We are, I believe, in Austin, Texas today in a beautiful weather. It's 91 degrees. I got, the crews here today. Our own King, Llewelyn King, and Dr. John Butler from UT displaying an amazing picture behind him. And then we have a special guest that I'll get to introduce in a minute here, Cheryl Mele, who's an old friend and a great professional, former COO at ERCOT and Austin Energy. We'll get to her in a moment. But real quick, today's another glorious day in paradise, as I usually call it. And John, how are you today?
I'm just fine. It's a great day,
John.
I think that I'm looking at all of I'm looking at all the numbers as we. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yep.
Do you
Go
hear
ahead.
me? Yep. I'm looking at all of the numbers.
Yeah, we have you, John.
As we
Go ahead, John.
As we try and deal with this. I'm looking at all the numbers as we're trying to deal with the situation that we're in. And I think we're all following the numbers to look at the future. We're wondering if the numbers are real. We're looking at the projections. As you know, my measurement is actually the number of beds that's available. So I feel a bit like I'm back in Vietnam, when we wake up and say, okay, men, let's go to war. It's a great day to die. So what you try to do is follow all the rules, follow everything so that you can really understand that there will be a future. Other than that, you follow the news. I think one of the big things, if I might say so, is bringing back manufacturing to America, or the supply chain back to America. And as you know better than me, Andreas, we've got to have great supplies of electricity and water as that goes along. So I think there's a lot of business opportunities in the future, and I'm excited about the future, but I'm apprehensive about the now.
Yeah. Llewelyn?
Well, it's a beautiful day in Ireland. It's not 91 degrees, but it's probably 71, and it's very lovely indeed. I'm not as optimistic about the return of manufacturing to the US as John is. I'm inclined to think some will come back, but much will find other homes overseas. There will certainly be a lot of manufacturing, American manufacturing, leaving China, and it's more likely, in my view, to go to other Asian countries, Vietnam, India, etc. Already, we're looking at manufacturing something, an inoculation for the pandemic environment. We're looking at manufacturing, and all of the people developing these are looking at manufacturing the virus defense in India, not manufacturing it in the United States. And that is not a good indicator of this return of manufacturing to the US. Some will come back, I think, hesitantly. I think that it's actually a very good time because there's going to be so much talent available to work in manufacturing, to work in everything, because there's going to be, for a long period, a large bubble of unemployed people, and there'll be a lot of talent in that bubble. But the thought that it's going to sort of whip out of China and whip into the United States, I think, is fiction.
Got it. Well, so we have a great guest with us today, Cheryl Mele, former Chief Operating Officer, Senior Vice President at ERCOT, and former Chief Operating Officer, Deputy General Manager at Austin Energy. And she started her career at GE as an engineer worked there for a long time. She's a New Yorker that moved to Austin long time ago and has settled roots here. She's currently the board director at Austin Science Education Foundation and also at the Association of Women in Energy, and also a board director of the Boy Scouts of America Capital Area Council. How you doing, Cheryl?
I'm doing well, Andreas. Thank you for having me join this weekly discussion with you guys. It is a gorgeous and hot day here in Austin, Texas, and we hope it tempers out a little bit in our time to come, right? Because we're still all mostly at home, so it would be nice to enjoy the outside a little bit more than what tends to happen when it's over 90 as the humidity climbs.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, we're delighted to have you. Looking forward to your comments and feedback and wisdom. So real quick, Llewelyn, let us get started on where are we on COVID-19, death toll, the latest numbers, where are we at?
Well, the best numbers I know are that it's in America, domestically, we're 93,800 and some. That's the best number that I know. It's the one the Wall Street Journal is using. It's the one that
Are the numbers trending down or trending up, or have we plateaued? Where are we at?
They're trending up. They're trending up. They're not trending up as savagely as they might have, but they're certainly still trending up. Every day we have more fatalities from COVID-19 than we had the day before. So they're inevitably trending up, and they will continue to do that probably until such time as we can say the disease is brought under control, which presumably would be either by some means we don't know, it fades out, but more likely that we have a viable vaccine and that we are inoculated across the population, which is itself a gigantic job. First of all, you have a verifiable vaccine, then you have to manufacture it in prodigious quantities with a lot of competition around the world for the vaccine. Then you have to inoculate people, and you probably have to overcome some of the prejudice against vaccinations, which have been generated over the last decade by the anti-vaxxers, particularly people concerned with whether vaccination leads to autism. There are a lot of people that being vaccinated would be an intrusion into their privacy and intrusion by the government into their bodies, so that it's going to be hard to vaccinate everyone, but I think the great majority of people will want to be vaccinated, will be vaccinated, and that basically will, like the conquest of polio, be another infectious disease that is conquered.
So soft opening is happening in some states. Some states are still locked down. Seems like, getting back to work is what top of mind on things. But I'm curious, now that we have Cheryl today, her point of view, her insights on the utility industry, probably went into shutdown early this year. So Cheryl, how is the utility industry handling all this in terms of running the business on a daily basis? Is everybody home? Is everybody at work? Give us a little insight on that.
Yeah, a little insight on that is that, first and foremost, we've been able to run the business effectively. And for many of us, that means working in our living rooms, our home offices, those types of things. But when it comes to our crews who must be in the field, they're still in the field. And we've changed a little bit the way that we've dispatched them and the equipment that we've provided them. But the lights are staying on and things are getting built, and we're keeping up with the things that we need to keep up with, getting the plants ready for the summer runs. And so the utility industry has largely been able to continue serving the customers. Now, has it changed the way that we work? Absolutely. I think that perhaps the conservative nature of utilities has been one that really was not, a high percentage of the workforce was not working from home. Unlike maybe tech businesses and things like that, where people are much more used to that. Our call center operations have largely been in our call centers on our floors, not in people's homes. And so we've had excellent IT support and capability to really move as many of those people home as well, to make sure that they could stay home, stay safe, and continue providing great service to our customers. And actually their service level we have seen has flourished. They've actually improved the number of calls, the on time, lower absenteeism. So I think we've learned a lot as an industry that will stay with us. You know, really the most significant change is that we're not, that for a customer level experience is that our service centers where people could come pay us in person, those obviously are no longer open. So people have had to do something different there.
So that's a good point, Cheryl, that I want to dig in. You know, I remember my days at Austin Energy. So the people that pay cash, how are they doing it?
I think that they can still make payment through the pay stations at the HEBs and things that we've always had agreements with. But we also have changed some of our practices in the short term. We are not disconnecting for non-pay. We're extending payment terms. So we've done other things that even if somebody has difficulty with getting access to one of those other places to make payment, they're not going to be harmed. On the flip side of that, of course, is we don't want people building up so much debt that it's hard for them to come out of that. And if you recall back in your days with Austin Energy, with new billing systems and things, that's always a tricky process as well. So staying in touch and doing active outreach to all of the customers is something our team in customer care and customer service has really been doing a bang up job. The city also, you know, we made some efforts to increase the available funding for people who were having difficulty paying their bills out of our Plus One program, and providing some additional funds that were available to our other customers who perhaps need even more level of support because of the change in their employment or other things. So a lot of funds and a lot of process changes have been put in place to assure everybody's safety, security, and hopefully provide them support if they need it.
Right. John, any questions for Cheryl and anything around this COVID issues? Anything that she has said?
Well, absolutely. I think what it tells us, as we have someone here from industry, is that the business models will change. That is, how we do business, how we relate to the customers, and how we pay our bills. And I think this is a great discussion that can center around all different kinds of business models and also the opportunities that's available. So as the business model changes for Austin Energy, it will also change for HEB. It will also change for National Instruments. It will also change for the University of Texas and Austin. So if, you know, when we begin to look at it and I get emails about what we're going to do, it's all about, the question is, will we allow large classes to stay online? Will smaller classes go to campus and then spread out? Are professors willing to go to teach? So I think what we will see is in addition to the manufacturing relocation, is a great emphasis on new businesses and new business models. I think that there will be enterprises who would say, okay, we went through this, working on Zoom is fine. Let us forego what we've been doing in the past. We're going to create a business model where people work from home. And then there will be other kind of enterprises who would say, okay, if I'm going to have a restaurant, I need this installed, I need that installed. And my question, and this is a question for Llewelyn, who's been around for a while, how long will the urgency last? When will people say, okay, it's over, and let me go back to my natural ways, as I have seen in some places in Austin?
Llewelyn, any comments on that or questions?
Well, I have a question for Cheryl, and that is, Cheryl, how are the utilities going to cope with the diminution of load? It's down over 5% for most utilities. I don't know about Austin. That severely affects your cash flow and presumably your future capital expenditures. How are you going to cope with that? And will eventually, particularly among the IOUs, will you see a raft of acquisitions or consolidations, which is one way that they tend to deal with a lack of load?
Well, I think that, we have not seen a significant drop off in load. If you follow the ERCOT market at all, they published their capacity, demand, and reserve in their SARA reports last week and showed that they did make some adjustment to their expectations for the summer load with regard to what they've seen from COVID impacts. Of course, it's early and we're in this big transition, right? We all went home, we all closed down so many businesses, and now we don't know exactly what the pace of recovery is going to be. But specific to Austin Energy, we are not experiencing a significant reduction. We're not experiencing a 5% reduction in our load. We are seeing some differences, but we don't really know what will be lasting effect. So financially, we're looking okay right now. But we do need to keep monitoring that, and we look on a weekly basis to see what new things we're seeing out of this effect. But the businesses in Austin, Texas are starting to reopen, as John alluded to, right? And maybe many of us are cautiously going about conducting any business out in public and dining out and all of those things. But, by the end of the week, we'll have bars open, we have restaurants open, we have retail locations open, and we're all in the topic and discussion now of when do we go back to the office? Because we've been working all along, right? We've been remotely working, but what are the reasons we go back to the office, and how do all those buildings behind Andreas come back online, or have they been online all the time? Those are the things that we can't always tell in our industry until we start to see some weather effects.
Edison Electric Institute says that the load is down across their membership at 5.7%. I haven't seen a number from the APPA, but
right.
Imagine that this is not out of line with the national effect. Texas may be different.
Yeah, clearly. So guys, real quick, changing a little bit topics. So stock market is steady, 24,500 today, little gains here, little gains there, it's pretty steady lately. Interest rates are at 0. Price of gas in Austin, the cheapest that I could find is $1.32 per gallon. That's pretty good. I had predicted that we were going to go lower, but price of oil and crudes had gone up a little bit, which is a good thing for the local production guys. So what is your sense on given those conditions? Apparently, sales of real estate is up, transactions are up. What's your take on the state of the economy? Anything you guys can share on what do you see from your point of view? Are things, is it the sky falling, or are things pretty steady now on the way up? What's your take? Anybody?
Well, Andres, I see a model that's quite different because we know what caused this. It's not like 1932 where there was a ladder of certain kinds of things related to what economists call the economy. I think it tells us that in our mathematical modeling of the economy, or equilibrium theory, we need to include in what the great Schumpeter, sociologist, economist Schumpeter would say is that, earthquakes appear not to have an effect, or viruses didn't have an effect, but they do. So I think what people are doing now, I think they're watching and I think they're looking. I think it is an economy of anticipation, an economy of opportunity. So if you look at the stock market, you can see how it ebbs and it flows, it ebbs and it flows. So there's a possibility, I think, that when the risk is taken out, and we have been reducing the risk, if you will, with everything from vaccines to the number of beds, but more importantly, I think now to the willingness of business enterprises to actually open up. So, I live on models. I live my world in mathematical models and prediction, the signal and the noise. So I think the economy will come back. I think it will come back in a different sort, a different kind of ways. And as we've discussed before, our main issue is who will be left behind as the economy bounces back, as the business model changes, as people do different kinds of things. We have always had a concern here about those people who in the gig economy. And the question is, will they come back in the same kind of way? But what I see a mathematical model of the economy bouncing back. I see the stock market bouncing up, and I see things really, really leaping forward once the risk is taken out of the model.
Mm-hmm. Llewelyn?
I don't think the measure is going to be the stock market. The measure is going to be the unemployment number. It's very high at the moment. Those people who are unemployed, a percentage of them, and this is the really big issue, will not still have jobs, even when the rest of the economy starts firing on all cylinders, because their places of employment have just gone out of business. We're seeing large retailers going out of business. Pier 1, for example, comes to mind. Many others are in a lot of trouble. J.Crew is in bankruptcy, etc. They're not coming back. Those jobs are not coming back. And it will take quite a long time for people to find new jobs, new employment, new efforts, new lines of industry. They will come back, but it will take a long time. And we're going to have this unemployment bubble moving through the economy, and it's going to be destructive of a lot of things. Initially, it's going to be very destructive of restaurants. It's going to be very destructive of commercial real estate. And we're going to have to repurpose a lot of real estate, repurpose a lot of the workforce. Eventually, the restaurants, even though if they fail, new ones will occur. That will be a terrible thing for the staff who work in restaurants, but it is not a national catastrophe. The disappearance, a very large tranche of retail, that is something of a major problem. And we don't know the full effects on the manufacturing industries. They may recover, but they will recover no faster than the total economy, and the total economy will be held down while we have a substantial number of unemployed workers.
Right. Cheryl?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is key, right? Is the jobs is what has the biggest impact on individuals and a big impact on the economy overall. And it'll be very interesting to watch this recovery and see what it looks like. It's, you know, as Mr. Butler points out, it's likely to be different than some of the prior ones because it kind of came, we know what caused it, but it is going to have, I think, some structural changes in the way that people think about their needs for commercial real estate, for office potentially. On the upside, there's probably a lot of technology companies that will benefit from the fact that we might be willing to invest a little bit more to make sure our workforce can be productive in various locations. And you know, I think it's just going to be a very interesting recovery to watch. I do worry about the people. Having three, you know, young adults in my family, I worry about what impact this has on them as they're in the career starting phase of their lives. And you know, will that have lasting impact? That I think is something to worry about, that a lot of those gig jobs that we started to talk about, those might look different. I don't know if we're all going to be as eager to utilize some of those services in the future, although some have flourished, right? If you look at Favor, if you look at some of those businesses that have been delivering curbside, they must be doing great right now, but those are not always the highest paying jobs. So many who've got one job are now in those economies, they may not be doing as well as they were previously. And that's what I worry about for our customers.
Yeah. So clearly there is a shift, you know, seismic shift going on. The business models and what COVID is doing, accelerating the need for digitalization. And there are clearly, you know, winners and losers here. I would argue that Texas, for example, is going to be a big winner long term of this crisis because of manufacturing coming back to the U.S. and where we want to put it if you had to pick a state. And speaking of that, the biggest example of that is a little company called Tesla. I'm sure you all heard the rumors or the news or the whatever that Elon Musk is looking at putting his next gigafactory in Texas, maybe in Austin, maybe in Hutto Taylor, maybe in San Marcos. We don't know exactly where, but what do you all think of that and the fact that it seems like every time we have either a major recession or a collapse that impacts the both coasts, East and West Coast, they all tend to relocate to the Gulf Coast, and Texas tends to benefit from that. Any thoughts on that, John?
Well, you know, in my discussions with the White House in the last 2 weeks, I like to say we're going to make America, Texas great. Now, what does that mean? You know, I find the Tesla thing very interesting because it shows to me how manufacturing has changed over the years. And I can tell you this, 40 years ago, when people sit around a table in Austin, Texas, we made Austin, Texas a high-tech center. We called it a technopolis, okay? And we were interested in looking at and bringing to the city those kind of enterprises that were clean. We started with software. Then, of course, Michael Dale did extremely well. Then Jim Tresor with National Instruments did extremely well. Then John Mackey with Whole Foods did extremely well. It goes on and on and on. But I think this would really be our big time manufacturing car industry. Remember that when Toyota came, there were discussions about should it be in Austin or should it go between Austin and San Antonio. Mm-hmm. But I think that enterprise now has evolved to a clean kind of enterprise, as a high-tech manufacturing kind of enterprise. So I'm excited about, you know, that company coming to Austin, Texas, because it provides lots of jobs. I'm also excited because Austin is a I call it the city that George Kosmetsky built. It is a different kind of city. I mean, what's the percentage of college graduates that we have in Austin? Something crazy, 55 or 48% or 52% or whatever have you. But you got to realize that this would be our first real-time manufacturing in the Detroit tradition, where for traditionally high levels of education was not required. So I'm excited because of the number of jobs that it brings. And again, Texas will benefit because of the infrastructure that we put in. You know, I tell my students, you know, if you want to be a movie star, you go to Hollywood. You want to be an opera singer, go to New York. If you want to start a company and be successful, go to Austin, Texas, Silicon Valley, or 128 Boston. So I think we have that tradition now of leadership. We understand the importance of business enterprises. And of course, we don't have a great tradition of unions in Texas. When we say unions, we mean the student union in Texas. Although some of our enterprises, like Southwest Enterprise, has great unions. You know, Herb Kelleher was my dear friend before he died, of course. And whenever the workers would demonstrate at Southwest Airlines, he would join them. So we have always understood the new models and how to take care of people. But I'm excited about us relocating to Texas.
Yeah, so the actual number that has been quoted out there is that plan will generate eventually 15,000 jobs. So Llewelyn, your thoughts on Elon Musk moving to Texas? What do you think?
I think Elon Musk is the genius of our time. I don't know why people hate him. Many do. I think that he's probably not personally lovable. I don't know, but he certainly has done extraordinary things in ways that have never been done before in aviation, in automobile development, and in subterranean tunneling. So he is a great and extraordinary figure to have. I would love to have him anywhere where I live. He would attract similarly gifted people, but it is no good states beggaring other states. It is absolutely no good saying, hey, we're doing great in your area and you're dying in Texas or vice versa. We need a national recovery with an even flow of jobs and with better paying jobs. And there is a tendency for companies always to seek, like water seeks the low ground, to seek the cheapest labor market, and that has a price, as we found out with China. We need better paying, better rewarding jobs, and I hope that after we're through this convulsion, and that's what it is, a great convulsion, we will move to a place where work is better rewarded and more evenly rewarded. We've just had a terrible expose, if you will, an opportunity to look into the meat packing industry, which we've known as awful from the times of the novelists who wrote about it. But apparently it hasn't improved so radically as we thought it might have. We need really a much better basic deal for workers and an even playing field between states for workers, so that we don't have this enormous sweep of labor going to California, leaving California, going to Texas, that there's work in Boston and going to Massachusetts. We need a kind of labor stability, and we certainly need people who work to be well compensated. In the 50s and 60s, we put people working manufacturing into the middle class.
Sure.
Now they're falling out of the middle class. The middle class being largely defined by people who could afford a certain way of life, a certain standard of living, and particularly who had a certain set of expectations. One of the most awful things of the last decade was people who came to believe that their children would not live as well nor prosper as greatly as they had. That is a tremendous negative dynamic to give to a nation. And we need to get beyond that. We need to think after this convulsion that things will be better and that there will be more social equity, as well as an enormous number of new opportunities for people.
Well said, well said. Cheryl, what are your thoughts on impacts or, Tesla moving to Texas, Austin / nearby? What do you think that's going to do?
Well, certainly, I think, jobs are good, as was pointed out by both. Good paying jobs are good for everybody. I think that from an infrastructure perspective, Texas has got ways to make sure that infrastructure is in place to service large businesses like that with high demands for energy. And so I think, locating someplace here would be great. And we certainly can use the jobs that we've discussed, right? We've got a lot of people unemployed right now. Are those good matches for the types of employment we need in our region? Probably. I think that that's a good type of job fit that maybe in our region we don't have a lot of. And so those would all be positives, but we'll see what ultimately gets decided, right? Is there just a lot of
absolutely
on Twitter, or is there really going to be a movement? None of us really know that outcome yet.
Sure. So I'm gonna take a quick break to do our pause for 30 seconds here. Bear with me. I'm gonna share my screen, and I'm going to plug real quick our Digital 360 Summit, which is coming up, and it's gonna be it's scheduled to be hosted August 18th through the 20th. We're still hoping that those dates are gonna work out. Obviously, we're monitoring this on a daily basis, and we will adhere ultimately to the rules and regulations that are available. We'll probably make a final decision to go or no go in the June timeframe. So far, I'm positive that it's going to happen. So we're expecting about 500 people to attend, and it's going to be an amazing event in San Marcos. It's hosted by Texas State University, where I happen to teach and run a big consortium on research as well, in addition to running CMG. We're going to have a golf tournament and multiple tours, and we'll have 14 keynotes and 9 panels. It's going to be a great opportunity. In terms of the folks that are going to be speaking, representing which companies, here's a glimpse of that. So it's kind of the who's who of all kinds of things. The Digital 360 Summit is all about the digitalization, decentralization, and decarbonization transformation the society is going through, focus on industry. So it's smart cities, smart utilities, and things like that. And we have a new website for the summit, digital360summit.net. Go check it out. And then I would say thank you to the sponsors of the Digital-Roundtable, Smart Water Summit, Smart Utility Summit. They are partner organizations at CMG. We work with them all the time. Great events for water utilities and power utilities. Check them out when you have a time. So switching back, clearly another topic that I'm curious to hear about, especially from Cheryl, is we discussed it last week. The president signed this executive order declaring the national grid in a state of emergency, and primarily the order had to do with don't buy anything or don't deploy anything going forward that is made by foreign actors that are not, friends of the United States kind of concept. So I'm curious, Cheryl, I don't want to really put you on the spot on anything that you can or not say, but as an executive, having run the entire grid, and having run the utility in Austin and now consulting in the marketplace. And by the way, anybody listening, you will need a new CEO for your utility. I couldn't think of a better person. You're just going to probably have to make her an incredible offer to move her out of Austin. But my point is it possible to really fulfill what that order says? Are there challenges to that order? What are the consequences of? I mean, how do utilities comply? How does that work out, Cheryl?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of questions, Andreas, and I did listen into a DOE call earlier. I guess it was either earlier this week or last week. And I think that the good news is that, nobody should be changing direction or not investing in their infrastructure or their capital projects right now because of that order. They're going to take about 150 days to really go through and say, what are all the things that we need to take into consideration before we move this further into rules and process and policy. But certainly there are concerns, right? And we've talked a little bit about the globalization of manufacturing and how great it would be to bring some manufacturing back here.
Right.
But when you think about everything that goes into some of our equipment and some of our suppliers, I think that it just needs those 150 days of study for somebody to go say, what are the risks? What are the things that we want utilities to take into consideration so that we can protect our bulk power systems? And so on the short term, I don't have a lot of insight into it other than let's stay tuned and let's all look at their follow-up actions and reports that come out in 150 days to make sure that we all can stay on a good path, that it's not going to be rip out everything you have and replace it. That's not feasible typically in our industry. It'll be something that going forward, and there may be some high-risk areas that we need to give attention to, but we'll have to wait for their further reporting out.
John?
Yeah, well, I do think that, in general discussions, and let me talk about the grid in America. There's a sense that we're running a 1962 manual grid when everything else is automated. There's a sense that we're kind of where we were back in the 1960s with other kinds of automation, in the sense that the power controls that really control the grid throughout America, not your great work in Austin. So I think that if we look at it, it's a great opportunity to put those things that's already sitting on the shelf on the grid. I think that if you look at the entire grid in America, from my understanding, is that if it goes down in Florida, if it goes down in California, if it goes down in New York, well then everybody cannot work together. And I think we all know that all of the fires in California, we had the clean energy, the green energy, and if you don't have a smart grid, it's going to be difficult to get that energy back on the grid. So therefore, it can create different kind of fires. So I do believe that when we look at the interaction between getting things back here and the ability to provide electricity and water, also, those are the things that would go into the engine that would actually make the automobile go, actually make manufacturing go. So I think this is a great opportunity to upgrade, to modernize, if you will, the grid in America, to make it all a smart grid like Austin, Texas, where we know where everything is, to bring on power controls, to bring on the automation that we have sitting on the shelf. And I think that it would take a public-private relationship to do that, working with industry and working with the government. But right now people just walk in and they turn on their electricity, it's going to pop on. But if we start bringing we start plugging in electric cars and bringing in manufacturing back to Shreveport, Louisiana, the question is, is the grid really ready to do that? And that's my conceptualization. Cheryl, I don't know if you want to comment on the old professor's modeling.
Yeah.
And looking at industries that change and industries that don't change, especially my comments about we're running the grid on 1960 technology when we have 2020 technology sitting on the shelf.
Right. Well, I think you're right. I don't think that's how we run the grid in Austin, Texas. I think that we have made good investments in technology. And I think those are some of the fears, right, that come along with why that executive order came out, is that, you know, things are purchased from all over the world, whether that's software or embedded, you know, embedded components within some of that hardware that, you know, and we all love to talk about that smart grid, right? At least I know Andreas does, and you know what that means. But I do think that we have a pretty modern grid here in Texas, not just in Austin, but across the ERCOT footprint. There's been a lot of expansion. The typical age of our assets here in Texas is not the same as it is in some other regions of the country. And you referenced those, you know, outages in California, Florida, New York. Well, those don't affect us here in Texas, right? We stand alone and run our grid here. So we do have a fairly modern system here. I think people have made good investments into the technologies and into their hardware here. We have that process established for how we invest in transmission and how we all pay for it. And I think that keeps us in good shape and responding to the growing types of energy demands that we have across this state and this region, keeping up with new things, right? Whether those are, you know, high-tech manufacturers, whether those are LNG terminals on the Gulf Coast. We know that we've got a lot of investment going here, and that provides us the opportunity to invest on our grid. Not every region of the country, as I think Mr. Llewelyn referenced, has that opportunity. So we are very lucky and fortunate that we've got the type of economy we have here that keeps our utilities, I think, in very good shape.
Llewelyn?
As far as I know, across the country, the utilities have been spending more than $100 billion a year on upgrading their systems. That doesn't mean they've reached any state of perfection, but there is an enormous effort. The big challenge really is in one word: resiliency. Because as we're going to have more technology dependent on electricity, we're going to have absolutely incredibly reliable electric supply. We have a situation where every time the wind blows, there's a brief outage. That's no good. We don't have it. And we're going to have to look at resiliency and all new pressures on utilities. And there's a whole set of new pressures. There's cybersecurity, that is a pressure. Changed weather patterns, that is a pressure. And occasionally physical attack on the system, which is a new pressure. It's a few years ago now, when a station was shot up, a transforming station was shot up in California with rifles, it introduced a new dimension into the security of the system. The future is super sensitivity, sensors on everything, quick reporting, and blindingly fast reaction. That's the road to resiliency, but without resiliency, we don't have smart cities, we don't have reliable anything. We have steadily increased our demands on the utility over the years, from it being a luxury, it was nice to have, to something which the whole country runs on electricity. We can do without many things. We cannot do without electricity. Let me, for example, suggest to you, supposing the convulsion produced by the virus were a blackout, a week-long blackout. We would be in a chaos beyond imagination. You would have total civil breakdown, and alas, you would have people with guns trying to get food, water, and gasoline from people who didn't have it.
Sure.
It would be a monstrous situation, and our national security, prime consideration in national security, should be the integrity of the electric supply.
Absolutely, which is why all the utilities listening should hire CMG to help them out with their roadmap to a transformation.
Well, yeah. Let me comment on the national. Let me comment on the national too, and the regional stuff. I mean, I think that if you look at business models, the grid is where computers were, 50 years ago. Before Microsoft came in and standardized everything. So can you imagine with me a grid in America, and certainly could be hacked, that's smart all over the country, so that when things go down in California, they can be helped out in California. When things go out in Florida, they can be helped out in Florida, rather than a regional grid where everyone is dependent upon the whole, like we have a great grid in the state of Texas. But can we take that model all over the country such that there would be, let's call it a central place where we know where every bit of electricity is at all the time. We know exactly where it's needed. That means California could move, and I'm sure we can do this now, could move energy from here to wherever it needs to be. And we get to a point where you're like a Microsoft, which can be hacked, it's smart. And you can see where all the downloads need to be. You can see how people are doing, and you can see how the different components of the grid is doing. So I view the grid of a business model as sort of a mom and pop deal now in different regions of the country, with the exception of the one here in Austin, Texas, or where the ERCOT footprint has been. But certainly in other parts of the world, of America, I think that's not true. And I think it needs to be standardized across the country in the national sense going forward. Is that too radical? Is that too radical?
There's clearly been a journey of that, and maybe Cheryl can comment on it.
Well, I think, I think that each region has kind of their market design, has their regional transmission operator or their vertically integrated utilities. I think that exists, and it's generally not the supply, but I think a lot of the things Llewelyn points out are the risks that we have been focusing on in our industry, right? The cyber risk, the resiliency, the changing weather, and how that affects the infrastructure, how that affects demand. And I think those are all of the things that we have been trying to do. And he also points out, I think, the position that we would all share as utility professionals is that we are a critical infrastructure, and we're categorized that by the, at a federal level. But, during a time like this, we have argued that we need to be treated just like the first line responders, because, we just would not be successful as we are even getting through this COVID without reliable sources of electricity. And so we've been very proactive in making sure that we are protecting those grid operators, protecting our system operators, our power plant operators, and making sure that they are, given all of the tools to protect themselves. But it's imperative that we continue thinking that through, and we take everything we're learning here and apply that going forward. Probably won't be our last run with this, but the frequency with which we've seen cyber opportunities, and whether that's just general phishing or other things, has been rampant during this period of time. So our industry is front and center on the attack, and mostly because it is so important to our safety and our security and our economy to make sure the industry has the resiliency level that it needs, and the technology investments in places like California, where they struggle with wildfires, to make sure that they're doing everything they can to use technology to really find that intersection of how to safely deliver energy while recognizing the environmental problems that they have and hazards that they have during some of those dry seasons. So lots of opportunity for continued investment in our industry and continued intelligence and recognizing those threats, because resiliency is utmost importance for us.
Absolutely. Actually, let me pile on the investment side of that. So since COVID, it's been around about 100 days. Here are some interesting stats. So PJM, it's struggling with their capacity market. Lots of rumor that they're going to kill it and switch to just an energy market, which would change the dynamics of the need for more power generation and so on. Con Edison in New York has just committed $1.5 billion to energy efficiency. So if there's a dip on demand, maybe this is a good time to invest in energy efficiency to really, improve the envelope of all those edge consumers, buildings, and so on. PG&E, it's seeking approval from the California PUC on 1.7 gigawatt hour battery project. That's 1.7 gigawatts. That's 1,700 megawatts. That's a lot of megawatts. That's a big battery project. EV sales have doubled up since COVID-19 started happening. So the sales of electric vehicles had doubled in that period of time versus last year. So instead of growing at a 10%, 15% month on month, it's doubling up. Solar PV sales installations have doubled up since COVID-19. Any thoughts on why clean energy would be growing dramatically in a time when COVID is forcing us to think about digitalization? What do you all think about that? John?
You know, I don't know exactly. I just think that if you look at the momentum of enterprises, and if you look at the perception of what things should to be, I think you know, my question has always been: can we run the country on windmills alone, and can we run the country just simply on what we call that kind of clean energy? So I think every enterprise has a momentum to it. That is, if you look at you know, we would call it in an analysis, how do you analyze an industry and what should you invest in? Well, there's a momentum to it. When computers were hit, everybody wanted to do computers. When clean energy hit, everybody wanted to be green. I mean, you know, clean. When green energy hit for enterprise, every enterprise, you know, said that they were a green industry. So I think that I would attribute it to a certain kind of momentum that happens until reality sets in, and then the question becomes, what really works? But I just don't know if we can run the country when the sun goes down and the wind stops blowing. But I think I would answer that by saying it's the momentum of business. You know, everybody want to invest in X, Y, and Z because it is the thing to do. And then, of course, as we like to say, you know, there's really no bubble until it bursts. And then, of course, when that thing hits, then the whole world changes. So I would answer by giving a momentum. That would be my answer. Just a momentum and expectations of what to do.
Llewelyn, any thoughts on that? What's going on with COVID impacting the growth of clean tech and energy efficiency?
I think it's probably the effect of the improvement in the general climate since the COVID. Since we've stayed at home, there have been clear skies all over the country. The fog has lifted over Los Angeles, etc. We've seen pictures of being able to see the Himalayas, which they have not been able to see. I think this has sort of spurred people to think about the environment. I also think that people may believe in some way that they can get fuel for electric cars. I would like to come to what John said. I don't know anything of that. I have no idea of the dynamics driving this. These are guesses at the dynamics. But what John was saying about clean energy, I think that there's a tendency to think that clean energy comes from wind and solar alone. Nuclear and hydropower are huge contributors to clean energy. We can build as many plants as we choose to build and find socially acceptable, and it's a social problem, not a scientific one. And hydropower, we probably have one or two more sites that could be developed. Not a lot of future there, although I think there is a future for low-head hydro, small generators in unique situations. But we don't have to be dependent entirely on windmills. Windmills do have to be counted with storage of some kind, and you just mentioned the large storage that they're trying to build. The big question you should ask yourself when somebody says batteries, ask them what is the drawdown time on the battery. Is it 48 hours? Is it 24 hours? Is it 10 hours? Is it a week? It has a wind drought in the summer. I think it's in the summer, which is about 10 days, according to Ernie Moniz, the former Secretary of Energy. And you can't have a battery that is drawn down in 24 hours. The nice thing about nuclear power is it's great, basic, clean energy, and the technology gets better all the time. What we now need is the moral courage to adopt this very useful tool.
Yeah. Cheryl, any insights? What do you think? What's happening here? COVID helping clean tech? What's going on?
Well, I think we've been on this track, right? And it's actually very positive, I think, to see it not slow down because of COVID, and that the investments continue because the technology has improved with leaps and bounds, right? The efficiencies of wind and capabilities. And as we see storage come online and we work through any remaining technical or safety issues there, that is certainly key to sustaining this investment in our renewable energy supplies. And of course, they're regionally available. You know, we are lucky again here in ERCOT that we've got in our footprint, right, in the Austin energy opportunity sphere to go out and procure new supply contracts for wind and solar. Because we've got abundant resource within our footprint, we're able to do that. Some regions benefit from the hydro. And again, there's probably not a lot of new being built there, but we've got regionally all over this country, different carbon footprints in our energy supply mix. And so I'm happy to see Austin Energy is charging forward towards zero carbon and having the benefits of our nuclear plants and our purchase power agreements for wind and solar. And I think that trend will continue. And it is nice to see the visible evidence that the world can be a cleaner place. And we've got the technology to work with to move us in this direction. And we've had this unfortunate opportunity to see what a cleaner place looks like. And I hope we don't let that go away, that it is something that we prioritize in our return to this new normal, as we all are saying these days, right? Let's keep that in mind. It is possible. And hopefully, even as we recover our jobs and we get people back to work, we really think about, do I need to drive to work today? It's congestion, it's heat, it's pollution. You know, if I don't have to drive to work every day, let me take back that learning from this experience and say, I can actually contribute in other ways to make the world a little bit better if I don't have to get out there in that traffic. And who hasn't enjoyed that aspect of this working from home, staying at home, is that when you do have to get out, the day's a little bit prettier, the sky's a little bit brighter, our view of the satellites is improved when you get out there at night or early in the morning, and it's because we just aren't putting as much stuff into the air. And so let's keep that as a takeaway from this, that we want to continue investments into that smarter future.
That is well said. Better said than the song "Let's Go to Lukenbach, Texas."
Oh.
But with the same spirit of Lukenbach. Because, you know, in Lukenbach, Texas, ain't nobody feeling no harm. And so I think it was well said, but it did remind me of the country song, "Let's Go to Lukenbach, Texas," and forget about all of this pollution and stuff. But well said. I think it's
worth the drive in our electric vehicle.
Absolutely. Any parting thoughts and comments, Llewelyn?
Not especially. I think we're all in some sort of agreement here. I think we all see the hope that can come out of the convulsion for an organized, cleaner environment, the essential role of electricity in carrying us through to that place, and how nice it would be if we made more stuff in the US. But we don't want to do it by beggaring all the other countries, so that we end up with a tremendous number of people trying to get into the US because their own countries are unlivable. We need to think somewhat globally. After we've gotten through this, I think we'll be in a better place. But getting there is going to be a rough slog.
Any closing thoughts or comments, John?
No, I think that's true. I think we've learned a lot of lessons about the world and about ourselves during this pandemic. As has been said, we learn a lot about how clean the world can be. We learn again that people are very adaptive to certain kind of situations because, you know, we adopted our business models very, very fast. And then, of course, more importantly, we've learned about our resiliency and how we can think about the future. As has been saying, it might be a little rocky going through this flight. We might have a little turbulence going through the flight, but when we hit clean air again, we will be smooth sailing. So I think there are lots of lessons. And, you know, my biggest concern are the younger kids, as Cheryl was saying, who just starting out in life. I mean, the cancellation of opportunities from the McCombs School of Business for kids, the cancellation, the putting off, if you will, of internships. and how they feel about the world. Because, you know, I always said you would have to bomb MTV to get the youth to be concerned about the future. I think this is a great lesson for all of us, and it's a great lesson for them to shape their world in the future also.
Mm-hmm. Cheryl, final thoughts?
No, I'm just anxious to hear that song in our final meeting. I think I wrapped up with my final thoughts at the beginning.
So Cheryl, we're delighted. Thank you for being with us today. You're an amazing human being, and congrats on everything. And stay healthy and safe. John, you want to take us away?
Well, you know, she suggested a song, right? Let's go to Lukenbach, Texas. Wheeling and the boys. In this successful life we're living, got us feeling like the Hatfields and McCombs. Between Jerry Jeff Train song, Hugh Berry's rain song, and Blue Eyes crying in the rain. Back in Lukenbach, Texas, ain't nobody feeling no pain. Pack your diamond ring, buy some boots and fancy jeans, and go away. Tie is choking me, and in your high society we play all day. We've been so busy keeping up with the Joneses, 4 o'clock garage, and we still ain't known. So maybe it's time we got back to the basis of life. Cheryl, you suggested it. You got it.
Thank you, guys. Great to talk to you again. Be well, be good. Say goodbye to everybody.
Goodbye. Take care.
Bye. Nice to join you guys.
Bye.